visiting professor at institutions of global repute like University of British Columbia, Canada, Australian National University, Canberra, University of Hiroshima, University of Kyoto in Japan, and the list is endless. Professor Singh's expertise spans across various themes such as national security, arms control, peace, and conflict resolution. With 18 books and numerous articles to his credit, he is a prolific scholar and a respected voice in international affairs. We are privileged to have you with us today, sir. Please welcome Professor Swaran Singh to deliver his keynote address.
Honorable Meenakshi Lekhi, the chief guest of IR Manthan, Honorable Founder President Mr. Chauhan sir, I understand he is online with us. Also online is your Vice Chancellor, Professor Shukla. And I understand online also there are many other participants, including one of my very dear friend, Professor Manish Srivastav, the Dean of SIS CUG. Of course, Professor Raman, Professor Manjari Singh, my colleagues at Amity University, and young IR thinkers of Amity. It's a delight and pleasure and honor to be part of today's discussion and to be able to sit and listen to Meenakshi Lekhi. I was briefly discussing with her how most of academics and young thinkers will be churning in IR Manthan the idea of India being VishwaMitr with a certain limitation of only knowing what is available in public, whereas a lot more, as she knows very well, goes on behind the scenes in the making of such important inflection points in foreign policy, where so many other people, especially when they're involved in Ministry of Foreign Affairs and cultural diplomacy, are constantly doing what we call brick building into the big idea that gets articulated and enunciated later. I'll take few, maybe about 10 minutes to basically discuss how, why, when the whole idea of India as VishwaMitr has come about, what it means, what makes it so distinct compared to other articulations around the world, and of course, what makes me confident that this idea is going to stick around and survive and become very effective in coming decades. In the public knowledge, what we have is the 10th Independence Day speech of Prime Minister. It is available online. You can, I'm sure many of you must have seen it because you came prepared to participate in this churning of India as VishwaMitr, where Prime Minister spoke of Panch Prana, 5 vows, which are significant to make India what he believes Viksit Bharat should be the aim of India and every Indian. And when he spoke of Panch Prana, 2 which have direct correlation to idea of India as VishwaMitra were to talk about completely eliminating the whole colonial mentality of not just leaders of India, but every Indian. And also, next was to make every Indian take pride and feel pride in our own historical legacies, in our traditions, in our knowledge, ancient wisdom, and so on. And that was the context where Prime Minister then spoke about, as Meenakshi Lekhi just mentioned, during the pandemic. If I am trying to virtually try to verbatim quote the Prime Minister, उन्होंने कहा कि सर्वव्यापी महामारी में इतने बड़े संकट में जब भारत ने सब जगह जाकर सहयोग दिया, तो उस परिप्रेक्ष्य में भारत एक विश्व मित्र की तरह से उभरा है और एक अटूट साथी की तरह से सामने आया है. I am trying to virtually try and remember his words. That was in August of last year. Next month in September, Indian Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar, he spoke at UN General Assembly and he mentioned what is India's approach to dealing with global challenges. And that is where he said India's approach is solution-oriented approach of one which is the approach of your friend. Your friend always looks at how to solve your problem. That again got reiterated as India's approach to global problem solving. What made this particular idea of VishwaMitr echo again and again is the fact that Prime Minister in subsequent speeches also mentioned it, many other places. For example, in Kana Shantiban in November last year, he again spoke about how colonial powers had destroyed great Indian traditions of yoga, of Ayurveda, and how India is trying to revive that. And how his government is trying to make sure that people don't have to go to government. Government should be coming to people. And that is where he again said that as a developing country, India is clearly emerging as a VishwaMitr. January this year again in Gujarat, Vibrant Gujarat Summit meeting, again brought that idea. So because it's been enunciated again and again by Prime Minister, I'm just quoting few examples, which I'm sure you have followed yourself, the idea, there's a critical mass around that idea, which is turning it into an academic concept of what is India as VishwaMitr. And I'll tell you 4 or 5 or 6 things that are relevant to underline as your focal point when you want to understand why is this enunciation of India as VishwaMitr. Number one, every nation when it emerges as a great power, it has to clearly enunciate for the rest of the world as to who we are and how do we wish to relate to everybody else around the world. Which means it has to articulate an essentially precise, well-calibrated new lexicon of foreign policy, new vocabulary of foreign policy, in which some of these buzzwords emerge as very serious IR academic concepts. And that is what India has also been doing. If you look at the whole progress that India is making, especially in economic domain, has seen India shift from what was quintessentially non-alignment driven foreign policy to gradually we began to talk about multi-alignment. And now that is moving step forward. Multi-alignment was neutral partnerships around the world to VishwaMitr, which means we are going to be value adding to partnerships around the world. And that is why we are going to be ensuring that the world partnerships become much more inclusive, much more sustainable, much more holistic, much more assertive. And therefore, that is the kind of approach that India is putting forward. Now, why it is different? What is distinct? What is unique about India's enunciation of VishwaMitr? Let us look at other great powers. You all are IR students. You know how England at some stage was known as the balancer in the balance of power paradigm which ensured security and development in Europe. So Britain behaved as a balancer. When the global gravitas, the gravitation point shifted to United States in early part of 20th century during First World War, United States used to follow non-alignment policy. United States used to call it isolationism. You all read this, that US policy was one of isolationism. When they got directly impacted upon by the First World War, they had to intervene, but they immediately withdrew again. They did not join League of Nations. They wanted to go back to isolationism. But after Second World War, they finally took over the responsibility of leading the liberal world order. And they articulated, for example, democracy as a priority for them to spread around the world. After Cold War, they were seen as the sole surviving superpower. They briefly tried to skirt the United Nations, but then realized they need legitimacy, howsoever powerful they may be. But closer example is one of China. China is also rising as a global power. And you realize in 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping mentioned reorganizing great power relations. He talked of national rejuvenation, end of the century of humiliation. He talked of China dream, like we also heard of American dream before. So every nation tries to articulate new lexicon in foreign policy as it emerges as a great power. But because China is similar in size, 1.4 billion people, Asian civilization, continuing civilization, comparison often becomes very, very normal thing to do when it comes to India, China. And then you notice that Chinese have normally been seen around the world as revisionist power, as power that talks of harsh reorganization of international relations. You have all heard about Wolf Warrior diplomacy. So people see China as a confrontationist China. Now that puts India in a very interesting spot of articulating itself as friend of the world, which wants to take, as Meenakshi ji just mentioned, everybody along. Take Russia along, take even China along, take United States along. Now that may be a piecemeal process, tough, difficult process, but it ultimately is going to deliver great results. And I think very good example is how India is engaging in West Asia. All major countries of West Asia see India as a very dear friend. From Israel to Iran to Saudi Arabia to UAE to Egypt, countries that don't talk to each other sometimes, all talk to India. And that made United States the global superpower when they wanted to create a second quadrilateral. The first quadrilateral is for Indo-Pacific, Japan, Australia, US and India. Now Japan, Australia are not in this second quad, is Israel, UAE, US and India. So increasing recognition of that India being able to manage multiple relationships and still ensure positive and productive nature of that articulation. Now, why I think this is going to be sustainable and deliver, three very quick things, and I will close after that. One, the idea emerges out of quintessential civilizational DNA of India. We are like that. We cannot be any different. More specifically from Vasudev Kutumbakam. Your world is a family. And how do you relate when you look at your family? You don't get angry and kill any of the siblings, even when something wrong has happened in your life because of your sibling. So because the idea is quintessentially our civilizational DNA, we will be able to sustain it despite all the challenges that come around us. Second thing that gives me great hope is the whole demographic dividend that India has. 2047 is not just 100 years. This is also the time when India's population will start becoming aging population. So these 2+ decades are unique window of opportunity for India to transform internally and transform the world externally because of demographic. Prime Minister often talks of democratic and demographic dividend that India has. And what has it produced for all of us to see? India becoming the 5th largest economy, again as Meenakshi ji mentioned, 5th largest economy. Now if you relate it to the constant devaluation of yen from early this year and the recessionary trends in Germany again from early this year, India might become 3rd largest sooner than most projections have shown us. Now it may be a distant 3rd, but being 3rd brings its own aura, brings its own leverages, brings expectations of the world as to what India wants to contribute on the big table. And the third and last point are our people. India is not just world's largest country. India has 25 million of us living around the world who also have same civilizational DNA as all of us and our leaders here. So the language of VishwaMitr clearly echoes. I mean, you have never seen any other international leader in a foreign land receiving welcome that Indian Prime Minister receives. And thanks to cultural diplomacy, that I'm sure Meenakshi ji had her own contributions to make. The connect of culture and diaspora is going to create pro-India constituencies around the world that will be echoing the enunciation of India emerging as VishwaMitr. And therefore, not only the leverages of India that are growing, the acceptance levels and echoes of that enunciation that will happen around the world by Indian diaspora and friends of India is, I think, going to really make it very effective in transforming the world and making sure India makes its own value addition in not just staying as an island of peace, as she mentioned earlier, when world is at wars in all other parts, but extending that sense of non-violence and peace that father of the nation used to remove the most powerful imperial power at the time. That quintessential civilizational DNA is being articulated and is being echoed increasingly. And I think young thinkers will see that when you become well-known scholars and take that as a pursuit, you will be engaged with this idea and this concept in coming decades, which will define India's foreign policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Singh, for your thoughtful address and for sharing your valuable insights with us. Next, we are honored